Hello and thanks for joining us for our mid-morning edition of Arirang News. I'm Mark Broom. Let's start by taking a look at the day's headlines. One final blast of winter. Part of South Korea is forecast to be blanketed with up to 10 centimetres of snow on this Tuesday. It shouldn't stick around too long, though, as temperatures will rise well above freezing later in the day. North Korea and the US will hold more working-level talks right up until the day of their second summit in Hanoi. They hope to make progress on their joint statement with a focus on denuclearization and improving bilateral ties. Plus, transatlantic tensions bubble up again. The EU warns of swift retribution if the Trump administration follows through on a threat to impose tariffs on European vehicles. So, South Korea's capital region is seeing some wintry weather with heavy snow advisories issued. Our Kim Dami is out at Gangnam Station in southern Seoul, where people are shuffling their way to work so they don't slip over. Dami, how's the situation for commuters there? And when will this snow, when is it forecast to stop?
Hi Mark, as you can see, it has just started to snow here in Seoul, and the Korean Meteorological Administration has warned commuters to be extra careful and take public transportation to work due to the weather conditions. The weather agency has issued snow warnings for major cities including Seoul, Incheon, and Sejong. Heavy snow advisory issues when there's more than 5 centimeters of snow within 24 hours. Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces are expected to be coated with around 5 centimeters of snow. Southern regions, on the other hand, are seeing some rain with 10 to 40 millimeters of rain on Jeju Island. The weather agency has said the snow will stop falling by 3 p.m. here in Seoul and in most other areas by 6 p.m. After all the rain and snow, the first full moon of the lunar year will be seen in between clouds tonight. Until then, drivers and pedestrians are warned to be extra careful on the slippery roads. That's it from me now, but I'll keep you updated on the weather throughout the day.
Well, one place we certainly won't be seeing any blizzards or snow is Hanoi. That's the location for the second North Korea-US summit, just over 1 week away from now. We'll have comprehensive coverage here on Arirang TV. So, with the clock ticking, working-level officials from both sides will be in the Vietnamese capital throughout this week and probably into early next week as well to drill down on the details on the joint statement that will be released after President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un wrap up their talks, hopefully their successful conversation in Hanoi. Park Hee-jun reports.
It's hoped North Korea and the U.S. can make further progress this week on their joint statement for the upcoming Hanoi summit. U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Stephen Biegun and his North Korean counterpart Kim Hyok-chol will meet in the Vietnamese capital in a bid to narrow their differences. Biegun previously said the two sides already set the summit agenda during their working-level talks in Pyongyang earlier this month, and that they will try to overcome any differences of opinion at the follow-up negotiations. Kim Jong-un and President Trump agreed in Singapore last June to establish new bilateral relations and work toward establishing peace and denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. Biegun and Kim Hyok-chol are to focus on specific ways to implement that promise. At the core of that is believed to be the verified shutdown of the North's Yongbyon nuclear complex, which produces the essential materials for making nuclear weapons. But the U.S. may demand additional denuclearization steps if North Korea is to get at least partial sanctions relief.
Yongbyon facility was already on the agenda a decade ago, and it's kind of obsolete now. So Trump administration may be asking for more, seeking for more from North Korea in return for economic rewards and some degree of easing sanctions on North Korea.
Watchers say the more specific the statement, the more likely the summit will be a success. As a result, it's possible Pyongyang and Washington may continue their working-level talks right up to the day of the summit until they find a middle ground that satisfies both sides. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
So, as a follow-up to that report, bidding to build formal diplomatic relations between North Korea and the US, it is being reported by CNN that the two sides are strongly mulling the idea of exchanging liaison officers, something that, if realized, hasn't happened in well over 2 decades. Lee Seung-jae with more.
Citing two sources familiar with the discussions, CNN reports North Korea and the U.S. are seriously considering a possible exchange of liaison officers in an incremental step towards building formal diplomatic relations. According to the sources, several U.S. liaison officers could be sent to set up office in North Korea, led by a senior Foreign Service officer who speaks Korean. While in its preliminary phase, the talks could mark a significant step in negotiations between North Korea and the U.S. A similar agreement was reached in 1994 with an agreed framework, leading to extensive discussions over exchanging liaison officers, beginning with up to 7 officers each. However, around a year later, North Korea scrapped the plan after a U.S. helicopter was shot down when it crossed over the demilitarized zone. While the exchange could improve ties between the two sides, watchers in the U.S. are cautious, saying the regime has yet to show a strong willingness to denuclearize. While North Korea has halted its nuclear tests and sharply toned down its rhetoric, President Trump's Director of National Intelligence said last month that North Korea is unlikely to completely give up its nuclear weapons and production capability. While the U.S. State Department declined to comment on the CNN report, if confirmed, it would be a significant gesture on the part of the U.S. to get North Korea to move forward on denuclearization. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
So let's stay with the build-up to the big summit. North Korea's protocol chief is checking out various spots around Hanoi. Watchers say his movements over the coming days should provide us with some clues on Kim Jong-un's itinerary while he's in the capital of Vietnam. Oh Jung-hee with the details.
Kim Jong-un will reportedly arrive in Hanoi on February 25th, a couple of days ahead of his summit with President Trump. For his journey from Pyongyang to Vietnam, 2 options are available: plane and train. It's likely that Kim Jong-un will take his personal jet Chonmae-1 and land at Noi Bai International Airport. Or he could choose a safer option and use a Chinese plane, just like he did for the Singapore summit. Either way, it'll take about 3.5 hours from North Korea to Vietnam by air. But it's also possible Kim could take a special train. Over the weekend, the North's protocol chief Kim Chang-sun visited Vietnamese city of Lang Son on the border with China and had a quick look at the rail tracks. This has led to speculation that Kim Jong-un may travel to Lang Son by train and then travel to Hanoi by road. That would take about 60 hours. As this will be Kim Jong-un's first state visit to Vietnam, Kim will meet the Vietnamese president and visit Ho Chi Minh Mausoleum to pay his respects. Ho Chi Minh had 2 summits with Kim Il-sung, the late former North Korean leader and Kim Jong-un's grandfather. But considering Kim Jong-un's strong will to develop the North's economy, it's highly likely that Kim will tour around spots that symbolize Vietnam's economic development. Reuters reports that he'll visit the manufacturing base of Bac Ninh and the industrial port city of Haiphong. It's possible that Kim will visit Bac Ninh because Pyongyang's protocol chief stopped over there and reportedly visited Samsung Electronics' smartphone factory on Sunday. Other possible stops are the Vietnam Academy of Agricultural Sciences and Hoa Lac High-Tech Park, where the North's Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho visited last year to study Vietnam's Doi Moi economic reforms. Meanwhile, Kim is highly likely to stop by at the famous tourist destination Ha Long Bay to learn how to boost the North's tourism industry. It was also visited by his grandfather in 1964. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
The European Union has warned of prompt retaliation if the US follows through on a threat to impose tariffs on European vehicles. For more on this and other news from around the world, let's turn to our No Aram. Adam, transatlantic trade tensions once again simmering up.
That's right, Mark. Monday's warning came amid reports over the weekend that President Trump received a report from the U.S. Commerce Department. Now, that report was said to have contained findings of a government probe into whether imported vehicles pose any national security threat. It was widely expected to clear the way for President Trump to threaten tariffs of up to 25% on imported cars and car parts, giving him 90 days to decide whether or not to take action. Now, that 25% is a tenfold increase from the current rate. If the president does impose new tariffs, then it would go against last year's agreement between Trump and EU Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker to refrain from escalating trade tensions. The EU, unsurprisingly, issued a stark warning against the potential duties.
Were this report translated into actions detrimental to European exports, the European Commission would react in a swift and adequate manner.
European car makers, especially those in Germany, have warned that the feared tariffs would add thousands of dollars to vehicle costs and potentially lead to hundreds of thousands of job losses throughout the United States. Even America's auto industry expressed concern, warning that such measures could move the development and implementation of new automotive technologies overseas. Meanwhile, private firms and government agencies in the U.S. are reportedly being targeted by aggressive attacks by Chinese hackers amid the continued trade war between Washington and Beijing. American security experts say Chinese hackers are now more focused on economic and technology strategies and are becoming more sophisticated. Kim Yo-sun has more.
Chinese hackers are said to be intensifying their attacks on U.S. government agencies and private businesses. Citing security experts, the New York Times reported Monday that such moves follow the Trump administration's prolonged trade war with Beijing. It explained that Chinese hacking attempts cooled 4 years ago when former President Barack Obama and Chinese President Xi Jinping reached a deal to prevent cyber hacking aimed at stealing trade secrets. However, experts say Chinese hackers have returned and are more sophisticated than ever. The New York Times said Boeing and T-Mobile are among some of the American businesses targeted by Chinese hackers, but it's not clear whether the hacks were successful. Director of the cyberspace program at the U.S. Council on Foreign Relations, Adam Siegel, explained that Beijing's recent intelligence collection is driven by the demands of its 5-year plan and other technology strategies. He says the tactics are different from the past when China was more focused on hacking for military purposes. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
American actor Alec Baldwin, who plays President Trump on Saturday Night Live, has responded to the president's latest shot at the show. In a tweet a day after Baldwin's latest impersonation, a disgruntled Trump described SNL as a, quote, total Republican hit job while calling for what he called retribution and an investigation of the show. He followed with a second tweet, again accusing what he called the rigged and corrupt media of being the enemy of the people. The actor responded by questioning whether the president's words represented a threat to his family's safety. The father of 5 also questioned whether it was appropriate for a sitting president to exhort his followers to think of him as an enemy of the people. Trump has attacked the comedy show on numerous occasions, and Baldwin has mostly shrugged them off, but this time it seemed to have struck a different chord. At least 24 people, including a 7-year-old girl, have died after a bus crashed into a dump truck in southern Bolivia on Monday. At least a dozen others have also been injured. A preliminary investigation attributed the accident to dense fog on the High Plains Highway connecting Potosi and Oruro. Police said the bus, carrying 45 passengers, was heading to Oruro from the town of Liaison on the Argentine border. 2 buses collided on the same highway just last month, killing 22 people. The French Fencing Federation has officially recognized lightsaber dueling. That's right, you heard it. Lightsaber dueling involving the famed weapon from the Star Wars movies as a competitive sport. The first player to win 15 points or whoever has the highest score after 3 minutes wins. Standing in a circle marked in tape, the players holding their LED-lit lightsaber can hit their opponent on the head to earn 5 points. Hitting a leg or an arm is worth 3 points, while hitting the hand gets you a single point. The Associated Press explained the decision to acknowledge it as a competitive sport is aimed at encouraging more people to play sports.
Now, from lightsabers to some economic news here in South Korea. Boosting manufacturing sector competitiveness is key to the survival of South Korea's economy. This is what Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol said Tuesday at a meeting with representatives of Korea's semiconductor, steel, auto, petrochemical, machinery and display sectors. These 6 sectors accounted for 3/4 of the country's total exports in 2018, topping $445 billion amid growing trade protectionism and weakening boundaries between manufacturing and services. He said coming up with new measures like Germany and the US have done to boost competitiveness is more important than ever. South Korea's presidential Tripartite Commission, which discusses deals between the government, management and labor, has failed to strike a deal on the expansion of flexible working hours. The Commission extended the initial deadline of the talks by another day and will try to reach an agreement on this Tuesday. Businesses have called for the expansion of the current maximum length of flexible working hours of 3 months to 1 year, yet labourers argue this could lead to wage cuts. The outcome of the discussion will be used by the National Assembly to amend related legislation. South Korea's export prices for January fell on month, while import prices went up slightly on rising global oil prices. The Bank of Korea says export prices dropped for the 3rd month in a row, falling 1.1% on month in January on lower industrial goods prices like electronics and electronics goods. DRAM prices in particular, they tumbled 15% on month. That's the biggest on month drop since August 2011. On lower global chip demand, import prices edged up 0.1% on month in January on higher global oil prices. Dubai crude, however, that is what Korea uses as its benchmark, what people put in their cars, went up 3% on month, recording an average of almost $60 a barrel. South Korea is looking to boost its arms sales to the Middle East. Supporting those efforts, Seoul's defense chief has been attending an international exhibition and conference in the UAE to rub shoulders with his counterparts from around the world and hold some talks, of course, as well. Kan Hyung-woo with the details.
The 2019 International Defense Exhibition and Conference opened in Abu Dhabi on February 17 local time, with some 1,500 defense firms from around 70 countries taking part in the biannual event. The exhibition also brings together top military officials from the Middle East region. This year, South Korea's Defense Minister Jonguns went to the exhibition to support the nation's defense firms' efforts to build networks with not only the host nation, United Arab Emirates, but also its neighboring countries.
When it comes to the development of weapons systems, no matter how good they are, they cannot be exported unless there is cooperation among countries. That's why the South Korean government is fully backing our firm's efforts to export arms to the region.
On the sidelines of the event, Minister Jung sat down with his UAE counterpart, Mohammed Ahmed Al-Buardi, and discussed ways to strengthen bilateral cooperation by improving exchanges in terms of military personnel, training, and cybersecurity. Minister Jung also held separate meetings with delegation leaders of Middle East countries, including Oman and Egypt, to discuss bilateral arms industry cooperation. Seoul's defense chief also met with his counterpart from Greece, Evangelos Apostolikis, and the two sides agreed to put more efforts to strengthen their military exchanges by pledging to work towards signing an arms industries memorandum of understanding in the near future. Around 30 South Korean defense firms, including Hana Defense, Korea Aerospace Industries, and LIG Next One, are participating in this year's event, slated to continue until February 21st local time. Kang-young-woo, Arirang News.
The South Korean government has laid out new measures to cancel the debts of people in vulnerable groups, such as those people who receive basic livelihood security. It involves readjusting the levels rather drastically and even getting rid of the remaining debt of those who are faithful in repaying them. Go Ryun-hee fills us in on this relief plan.
It's good news for people in Korea who've been struggling to pay a relatively small debt. The Financial Services Commission and the Credit Counseling and Recovery Service announced on Monday new debt forgiveness programs for marginalized groups. The Credit Counseling and Recovery Service is an organization established in 2002 to support the financial recovery of low-income families. Specific measures include debt relief for those who receive the government's basic livelihood security payments, recipients of disability pensions, seniors and low-income people who've been unable to pay a small debt for more than 10 years. However, there are some conditions. The total principal of the debt cannot exceed around $13,000, and the borrower needs to repay in a faithful manner, that is, make their promised payments for at least 3 years. This is on top of the government's existing measure, providing partial debt relief up to 90%. For instance, if a basic livelihood security recipient owes $10,000, the government reduces the debt by up to 90%, leaving principal of just $1,000. And if this person pays back half of that faithfully for 3 years, then the remaining $500 is canceled automatically. The Financial Services Commission says this will take effect in June, after related agreements from the Credit Counseling and Recovery Service are revised. This latest measure is part of the Moon administration's efforts to build an inclusive nation by helping low-income people get out of debt and improve their quality of life. Ko-Ryun-hee, Arirang News.
Now to some big health-related news. South Korea will start approving imported medical cannabis for self-medication from mid-March. The Food and Drug Safety Administration says it will allow patients diagnosed with epilepsy, rare or incurable diseases to buy 4 types of cannabis-based medicine through a state-run medical center. The medical products have been approved by health authorities abroad and will be distributed to patients after a thorough screening of their condition as well as their medical records. This marks the first time South Korea has changed its tough laws on cannabis control. Now, despite concerns over the worsening levels of fine dust here in the nation, a new report by the World Economic Forum shows South Korea is among the countries with the biggest annual demand for coal. In addition, the International Energy Agency reported last month that South Korea's coal consumption in 2017 swelled by 11.5% to about 150 million tons. Industry officials say tougher measures need to be placed on coal consumption in South Korea in order to tackle what is a truly chronic issue with fine dust. Among the countries with the biggest rise in coal consumption, India, perhaps no surprise, topped the list, but it was followed by South Korea, then Russia, and then China.
Good morning. The wintry precipitation has picked up since mid-morning. Seoul has seen 1.5 centimeters of snow so far, and as more wet clouds are moving into the country. So a heavy snow advisory remains in place for Seoul and Gangwon-do province, as well as other parts of the country, with more snow expected for the next couple of hours or so. And between 2 and 7 centimeters of snow will fall, possibly 10 centimeters in some areas, while southern regions will see 5 to 40 millimeters of rainfall today. So when will the wintry precipitation ease today? It will start to let up on the west coast from this afternoon. The snow will turn into rain before completely stopping by the late afternoon. Daily highs will be similar to yesterday though, ranging from 4 to 15 degrees Celsius this afternoon. So the snow should not stick around for too long. That's Korea for you, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's all we have for now on this Tuesday morning here in Seoul. Do stay tuned to us here on Arirang TV. Plenty more coming up as usual, and we have our next newscast. That's happening at noon Korea time in around 90 minutes from now with our very own Lee Ji-yoon. So until then, goodbye.